Hello, everyone. Good morning. If you're joining us in the morning where you are, just seeing the attendee list going up here. So we're just going to give everybody a moment to join. A lot of people signed up for this event. It's a popular one. So people will just take a moment to join in. Another minute or so. All right. I'm going to get started with some of our initial pieces, just so that we can get through everything we want to get through in this event. I'm joining you from unceded Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh territory in what's known as Vancouver. My name is Kasari Govender. I'm the BC's Human Rights Commissioner, and we start what we do with a territorial acknowledgement in order to follow protocols, but also to show respect for those who stewarded these lands since time immemorial, as well as recommitting ourselves that respect also comes with a sense of responsibility for continually trying to and working to undo the history of colonialism that continues to have such an impact today. Excuse me. We in British Columbia work across many unceded and some treaty lands here in BC. So we work across a diversity of nations' territories. A couple of housekeeping things before we dive in. Closed captioning is available by clicking on the 2 CCs at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So if you need that, you can change the language with the arrow. Folks from our team at BC's Office of the Human Rights Commissioner will be in the chat, so they'll be able to provide you with links as we go through and support for any tech issues. Please let them know if you have any of that. Please note that the webinar participants cannot communicate with each other through the chat. So when you send something through the chat, it just goes to our team, and they can see and help you out with that. When you want to ask questions, I really encourage you to do so. When you want to ask questions, please do so through the Q&A function, again, at the bottom of your screen. If you can't see it, you just bring your mouse down and hover over, and there's a Q&A function. Those questions, we'll look at those. We may not be able to answer everything, but we will certainly take a look and endeavor to make some time for that throughout and at the end of the session. We are also recording the session today, so we can post it on our website later as an ongoing resource available to folks who want to look at this after the fact. So with the housekeeping out of the way, I am so pleased to welcome my 2 guests, Jessica Love and Georgia Franklin, and to welcome all of you to this conversation today, celebrating gender identity and expression. In August of last year, 2024, BCOHRC, BC's Office of the Human Rights Commissioner, released a report called Rights in Focus. And this report surveys the landscape of human rights in the province to raise awareness about human rights issues and try to leverage this knowledge to create change. So today's event is the 3rd in a series that's highlighting different topics from that work. So it was 10 systems that we looked at, and we're highlighting some of those through some of the conversations that we're having through this series beyond the headlines. Our goal in this series is to have conversations with leaders and change makers about key issues facing people in British Columbia. So as I said, today we're here focused on the rights of people who are gender diverse. This conversation also engages the rights of young people, or rights of all of us, to read and access education. So in lots of ways, we're talking about kind of the intersection of those pieces of our right to engage with these issues, a right to read, a right to learn, and the context of celebrating gender diversity and diverse gender expression. When I think about this topic, and we're going to get into some of the fraught stuff in a moment, but in many ways, when I think about this conversation, I think about sometimes the struggle that gender diverse folks have in living in our world, expressing themselves in our world. But at the same time, it's a lot of that's imposed from the outside, and there's a real joy in being yourself and being able to be yourself and to be recognized for who you are, and your fundamental right to human dignity. And to in that context, I want to recognize that we're having this conversation in the context of what's happening in the world of rising transphobia and homophobia, in public and in mainstream political debates, both south of the border and here closer to home. Like many forms of hate, hate against gender diverse people is often fueled by mis and disinformation. And I know that while trans and gender diverse people have often been placed at the center of divisions in our society, as they are being now, hate against that community impacts all of us. And it calls into question our humanity and our respect for our fundamental human rights. The conversation is also happening during Pride season, when we're not only recognize the oppression in our communities and renew our commitment to this struggle for equality, but where we also get to celebrate gender and sexual diversity in all its colors of the rainbow, in all shapes and sizes. We're hoping, as I mentioned, to in our conversation today to feed into that joy through the power of story and deepening our understanding of what access to books like this, why access to books like this is so important, particularly for the well-being of our young people. So I want to turn now to introduce our guests in more detail. So Jessica Love is the author of Julián is a Mermaid, the one we're here to talk about today. Julián at the Wedding and a Bed of Stars, published by Candlewick Press, and the illustrator of many more books, including I Love You Because I Love You, The Poet and the Bees, and Little Passenger. Jessica grew up in Southern California, raised by a pair of parents. She comes by this work naturally. She studied printmaking and illustration at the University of California, Santa Cruz, and then went on to study drama at Juilliard. After working as an actor in New York for 10 years, she turned to storytelling in this written and painted form and created Julián is a Mermaid as her first book. She lives in the Hudson Valley, New York, with her husband and her son. Jessica, did you want to say anything by way of introduction?
I think you got it. I'm really happy to be here with you all today. Hi.
Thanks so much. And then turning to Georgia. Georgia Franklin is the provincial coordinator of British Columbia's summer reading program, a free, inclusive literary program offered through public libraries, connecting young people with stories, resources, and communities. And for many of us who are parents or have young people in our lives, this program is very familiar to us. Our kids look forward to it in the summer. Georgia is currently a Master's of Library and Information Sciences candidate at UBC School of Information. She has an extensive background in libraries, in public libraries, working for over a decade at Vancouver Public Library, most recently in the Accessible Services Department. And Georgia, did you want to say anything by way of introduction?
No, that sounded very flattering and lovely. I'm happy to be here.
Excellent. So today's discussion will be shaped by one of our books from the Commissioner's Book Club, another project that we do where we release a selection of an adult book and a preschool book each month that we think highlights human rights. And it's a very personal project to me. These books are all books that have meant something to me in my life. Julián is a Mermaid has been a favorite in our family ever since we knew it existed. So it was an easy pick for our book club. And I'm going to pass it over to Jennifer for a reading, and then we'll jump into questions and discussion after that. Jessica, over to you.
Okay, so I'm going to try to grab the screen. Tell me if this works. Okay. Right. Let me see. Forgive me for being a little slow with this. I'm kind of Zoom illiterate.
No problem. We can see it, but we can see it not yet in slideshow.
Yeah. Me too. How do I make this full screen? Full screen. Okay.
There we go.
Excellent. There we go. All right. Y'all ready?
We're ready.
Julián is a mermaid, written and illustrated by me. So we begin underwater at a water aerobics class at the YMCA for Nana. And as we leave the YMCA, we go to get onto the subway in New York City. This is a boy named Julián. And this is his abuela. And those are some mermaids. Julián loves mermaids. And as he stares at the beautiful mermaids, the train begins to fill with water, and his hair begins to grow. And a swirl of fish, every color of the rainbow, swirls around his body, transforming him into a mermaid. And his tail is the color of lilacs and marigolds, and a beautiful starfish swims towards him with a necklace in its mouth when, Vámonos, mijo, this is our stop. And they get off the train in Coney Island, and they wave bye-bye to the mermaids. And as they walk through the neighborhood, Julián says, Abuela, did you see the mermaids? I saw them, mijo. And they come back to her apartment, and Julián says, Abuela, I am also a mermaid. And they go inside, and Abuela says, I'm going to take a bath. You be good. Julián has a good idea. And he kicks off his shoes, and he takes off his shirt and his shorts, and he pulls some fronds from Abuela's fern and uses her sleep mask to make himself a crown. And he sees her curtain fluttering in the breeze, and he knows just what to do with it. And he makes himself a mermaid tail, and he is fabulous. Oh. Uh-oh. But she's back, and she's holding something behind her back. Come here, mijo. For me, abuela? For you, Julián. And they go outside. Where are we going? You'll see, says abuela. Mermaids, whispers Julián. Like you, mijo? Let's join them. And they do. The end.
Wow, that was so beautiful to hear it in your words and your voice. Thank you so much, Jessica.
All my extra words.
Yeah, it adds something. I actually heard different things in the story coming from you. So thank you. I don't think I'd ever noticed the necklace connection, the fish and his grandma. So that was beautiful. The book really portrays the importance of community acceptance in a child's journey of self-discovery. Can you tell us why that theme was important to you?
I mean, I think when we look for love in life, any kind of love, the love of a parent, the love of our friends, romantic love. I think the way you know when you've got it is this feeling of being seen, of being, it's that shock of recognition where you can see yourself reflected back in someone else's eyes with love. And I think for me, the sort of the closing of the circle of this story, the first half is Julián sort of making this discovery about himself and affecting his transformation. But the circle isn't complete until he's witnessed by someone who cares about him, and that person, his grandmother, is able to receive that with love and reflect it back to him. So yeah, I mean, the book is very much about seeing and being seen by the people you love. And I think that's the very first foundation stones of community, because that's building community on the foundation of who you really are, and giving the gift of seeing and recognizing the person that the people you care about are showing themselves to be. I think that's kind of the whole ball game.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way to say it. This book is about seeing and be seen, or that circle of love. Georgia, in your work, how do you see diversity in all its forms that it shows up in Julián as a Mermaid? But I'm sure you see that in your work in terms of looking at children's books more generally. Can you talk to us about the importance of portraying that degree of diversity?
Yeah, absolutely. First off, Jessica, that was like absolutely lovely. What a beautiful reading. I as well have read Julian is a Mermaid many times. And yeah, there's just something magical about hearing it from you, the creator, and you could give such insight into it. So I'm very moved right now. So in our work at BC Summer Reading Club, we have what I consider to be like the gift and the responsibility of surfacing stories for parents and caregivers and kids alike to give them the ability to access them. I think you can relate maybe, Kasari, with your work with the Commissioner's Book Club, how meaningful it can be sometimes to share these stories and platform voices. And I feel like I've been really heartened lately when looking at like the sort of breadth and diversity that exists in representation in children's books uh, in the current climate, where you can have an absolutely phenomenal list of recommendations for Pride Week or for any week, but something that specifically celebrates LGBTQ stories and experiences. But now we're also being able to see true representation, meaningful representation in books of any myriad of subjects. So for what we do at BC Summer Reading Club, we base some of our lists off of themes that are a little bit adjacent to identity, but we are still able to embed that celebration of queer families and queer life into books that are maybe about the theater, or books that are about going on summer vacation and that kind of thing. So it is a really nice landscape to be working in these days. And your question had me thinking, and listening to Jessica had me thinking about I have a very little friend, an 8-year-old friend, whose grandpa is gay and has a partner. And when I was doing my work, I came across a book called Granddad's Camper, and it's a storybook about a girl and her granddad. She encourages him to get back out on the road and pick up adventure again. And so it's this wonderful intergenerational story about having grandparents, which everyone can, or a lot of people can relate to. And it happens that the grandparent is gay and has a partner. And so when I shared it with my little friend, she just like lit up at being able to see her poppy represented in stories and her own experience, which she might not have seen as easily in her community, in her friend group, in her peer group. And so, what you said, Jessica, about building community from a foundation of the authentic self, it helps children see themselves in a way that is honored by the broader community, even if they might not see it specifically in the people that are right around them. So that is the importance, I think, of representation in children's literature.
It's really a beautiful way to say that. My next question was going to be around why it's important to talk about queer families and diverse gender representations in children's stories. I think you've just started to answer that, or maybe completely answered that. No, it's wonderful. Do you have anything you want to add on that, Georgia?
Well, yeah, I could talk for a little bit. I don't want to monopolize the conversation though, because I feel like it's a gift to have Jessica here.
Pass it.
But what I've talked a little bit about, and what I think any person who works in children's literature or in librarianship in the audience will know about, is the concept of mirrors, windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors. This is a framework that was developed by Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop in the 1990s, and what it's a way, an analogy of understanding the power of story. So a window is pretty straightforward. You look through it, you see another world. This could apply to books about medieval times, like information books about medieval times. What I'd like to focus on more is the mirrors and the sliding glass doors. So we've talked a bit about how, Jessica, you put it so eloquently, about how Julián is a Mermaid functions as a mirror for young people, young kids exploring their gender expression or their queerness, as a mirror for themselves to be seen and see themselves.
Mhm.
And what these stories can also function on as is a sliding glass door, where through a really well-crafted story, people are able to connect empathetically with a way of life that might not be theirs, and sort of relish in that shared humanity, build upon that shared humanity and build community. So when I was listening to you read the story just now, as I've read it in the past, I've related to Julián and their experience, like that visceral experience of like falling through the water and discovering themselves and sort of this unfolding and flourishing of the self. And it's such a beautiful depiction of that. But this time listening, I was really struck by Abuela. Like, I love the Abuela character, and I never noted that you dedicated it to your Nana, like how special that is. But that for me is my sliding door today, where I kind of connected to what it would feel like as a parent or as a caregiver to support a kid in their self-discovery and know how to do it. And she's kind of, okay, come on, mijo, like we're going. This is what we're doing. Like, just fits that character for me of like a grandmother so well, or a parent
She's
so
been
well.
described, she's been described as having resting skeptical face.
Totally.
That's perfect.
I love the Abuela character, but yeah, so that for me was like my big takeaway today, was that sliding door, yeah, it can be so important in so many ways. Today for me, it's helped me connect with sort of with parents or caregivers and grandparents, and how they work to support the kids in their lives. So well done. But yeah, that's just a quick, and if anyone wants to learn more, it's a very quick Google search. If you Google windows, mirrors, sliding glass doors, comes up.
Thanks, Georgia. That's such a useful analogy. Maybe we can continue that a bit, Jessica. I want to hear your thoughts on creating a story um, where it seems at least you had a message you wanted to communicate around gender diversity, or maybe not a message, maybe that's the wrong way to say that, but a story to tell about gender diversity, and why was that important to you, if that was in your mind, and how did you choose to do that in a way that suited this particular age group?
It's such a good question, and I have never been able to answer it succinctly, but maybe today's the day. Um, Around the time when I was working on it, I was still working as an actor, and at the time, the guy I was dating had an older sibling who who's a trans man, but he didn't transition until much later in his life, like he was in his 50s. And I think, you know, making that choice to come out to his family, I think was pretty difficult. So that was in my mind. I was watching a lot of RuPaul's Drag Race, and I was extremely inspired by the documentary Paris is Burning. If any of you are unfamiliar with it, it's a masterpiece. It's about the drag ball scene in New York City in the 1980s. And I mean, these people speak for themselves. Check it out. But at the end of this film, I mean, there's a lot where these people, and they're pretty young, you know. It's like, I mean, obviously they're at the balls, you have houses, and these houses function as families, as chosen families. But a lot of the kids in this documentary are talking about their relationships with their birth families, and how when they started expressing themselves in the way that felt authentic to them, suddenly their families were done with them. So many of them got kicked out, ended up on the street, and it was just this, it's so painful to, you know, to imagine having a child with that much light and artistry and creativity and sense of self, to not be able to hold that. And I don't know, I almost, the idea for this book almost felt like an effort to like go back in time and rewrite that family story, that family of origin story for these kids who I'd just fallen in love with, and maybe for future generations, for kids who might not have someone in their lives who could see them and handle it and love them for who they are. I wanted to make like a template for what that might feel like. That being said, I really didn't want to write a didactic, like, lesson-y book. I wanted it to feel like going to a party. I wanted it to be an experience, not a like teaching moment. And if there is a teaching moment, it's as you said, it's really for the grown-ups reading it. I don't think I think for the kids it should just feel joyful. Did that sort of answer?
Yes.
Yeah, it really does. And I think, you know, in some ways I think of it as a teaching moment, but a teaching through storytelling and emotion, to have to normalize in some way and make, and, you know, and show the beauty of through your paintings, this idea of coming to yourself and knowing yourself and getting accepted for who you are. There is teaching in that, but it's not didactic, as you say. It's very much through that lens of story. But I think for reading it to my child and talking to other parents about it, there is that, if this is part of your life growing up, then maybe you won't create the same obstacles for others. Maybe you won't see the same obstacles for yourself when you go through those journeys of identity. But that was so beautiful how you spoke about going back in time and rewriting those family stories.
I was going to quickly say, for Paris is Burning, one of the main people in it, Venus Extravaganza, who lives like rent-free in my heart forever. She had her family, the Extravaganzas, but she also did live with her grandmother. And there is something such like it's such a pointed connection there that I'm wondering if that was ruminating or if it wasn't, that it's the importance of that family member. We're
So
rewriting it.
if we're going here, this is actually kind of
We're going.
amazing.
Yeah.
So after this book came out, um, people started reaching out to me like on social media, and I got this one message from um from a man named Julián, and he was like, knock knock, hi, this is me. This book was about me. Um he was he's like peripherally in Paris is Burning. He was in the house of Extravaganza. Hector Extravaganza was his gay father, like completely part of that lineage. And he also had this incredible grandmother who like saw him. And he
Mhm.
showed me this picture of himself at like 7 years old, voguing in his backyard. And he told me this story about how when he was 20 or 19 years old and like just staying home and reading and not venturing out into the world, his grandma gave him $50 and she's like, you're gay, go out and go to a party, make your friends, go,
Mm.
we're happy for you, nobody cares.
I, sorry, go
Magic.
ahead. I want to return to that theme of joy in a moment, but I want to take us to a darker place for a moment, and we'll get back to the joy.
Okay.
Um, we've seen the backlash in Connecticut. I saw the feature on Fox News about Julián as a mermaid. We saw the banning of the book in Florida, and Jessica and I were chatting last week in preparation for this, and she shared that this is the second most banned children's book in the U.S., which sent my 10-year-old and I down a path to research the banned books, which is fascinating, and pulling them off of our shelves and trying to understand what could lead to such a condemnation of so many beautiful stories. Um, Closer to home, Georgia, I understand that there has been some controversies about reading materials in libraries. Can you tell us a little bit more about how this backlash that we see playing out across the states has played out as well here at home?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the maybe depressing section of the conversation, but it's actually honestly not as depressing as you think it might be. Um,
Good to hear.
so yeah, we are definitely the Canadian context of challenge materials and challenges to libraries um, is very much overshadowed by the United States and what is happening there. But there are real things that happen here all the time. There's actually a database that anyone in the public can go access. It's called the Canadian Library Material Challenges Database or something. I'm saying it wrong, but the link will be right. Um, and it's based out of the Center for Free Expression. And libraries can submit challenges that they've received, whether it's through a written form complaint or anything, to try and remove books from the collection or remove displays of solidarity from the library in general. So in the United States, you see some really very organized and targeted action against specific books. Like Jessica, I'm sure you know about this. Unfortunately, what we see in Canada or in British Columbia is a little bit of that. There are some groups that have taken it upon themselves to target books from lists, probably books from your list, books from SOGI lists. But what we do see a lot of is individual acts in libraries where books are being removed from shelves and hidden from the public, where books are being vandalized, where books are having pages ripped out of them. And what I'm happy to report is that these are being tracked, first of all, so we know and we can see where trends are happening. And kudos to all the public libraries for participating in this. It's a very unpleasant part of our work. And then also that across the board, public libraries have really stood behind the material in their collections and have stood up for a person's freedom to read and right to choose what they want to read, freedom to access information, and then also to support a diversity of voices. So that's the material side of things. And then something that is a little bit more prominent, which maybe members in the audience have heard about, is some of the backlash to drag queen story times that has happened quite a bit, which I think is it sort of dovetails in with Julian's story of gender expression. So there have been drag queen story times throughout North America since around 2015 is when they started to really gain in popularity and in momentum. And we've had quite a number of them in British Columbia. They are a lightning rod for hate-based disruption, is what I would say. I don't think a single library has tried to stage one without receiving some sort of threats from the public or condemnation from certain segments of the public. One library, Nelson Public Library, received so many threats that they did have to cancel for fear of safety of the staff and of the presenters. So that was a really sad and unfortunate moment. But the good news, Daily, because I'm being like really toxic, this is a love fest for the celebration of LGBTQ children's literature. There was one in Coquitlam Public Library where they obviously had gotten some pushback and some hate and some threats, and there was a protest being staged at the event. And they decided to go forward with the event. But what happened was a community group of allies and supporters and people who had heard about it in the news showed up, and they were 10 times the size of the protesters out front. And they literally out cheered the protesters and drowned them out with love. And the program itself had record attendance. So I know I'm putting a bit of a positive spin on it, but I would like to say that when I was doing sort of the reading and preparation for this talk, I was really struck by the power of the LGBTQ community and their allies in and around British Columbia, and the amount of advocacy work that is happening when absolutely, yes, there are definitely moments of people pushing back, hiding material, destroying material, that kind of thing. But we're organized in our support.
Yeah, I love that. The stories of how we meet those protests and those
Mm-hmm.
conversations. There's a question from the audience about what role mis and disinformation play in shaping people's perspectives on kids and discussions around gender diversity in our schools and communities. And it's a question that is close to our hearts here at BC's Office of the Human Rights Commissioner, because we're about to launch a big public campaign on addressing mis and disinformation. And it was key to a piece of work that was key to a big inquiry we did about the rise of hate during COVID or during times of crisis in society. But it also reminds me of the anti-SOGI protests that happened across Canada. So for those who may not be familiar with the term, SOGI is sexual orientation and gender identity. And there's curriculum, what people call curriculum. It's really just some school system based materials that are in our public schools here in British Columbia, optional for teachers to use. It's a tool to talk about to counter bullying, to talk about inclusion and acceptance. And there were protests to having any of those materials in schools across the country. I think it was almost 2 years ago now, and there were significant counter protests. So that was the good news of the story. But one of the pieces that I found heartbreaking. There was so much about it that was heartbreaking, but one of them was how much mis and disinformation there was about these materials and how that was used to garner support from folks maybe who had religious affiliations or felt strongly. And honestly, all of us would have felt strongly if we'd believed this information too, which was, there's pedophiles in our schools. Your children are being groomed. They're being sexually assaulted. They're being shown pornography in class. As parents, of course, you would not want that to happen to your children. But what we're actually talking about were materials that were aimed at inclusion and acceptance and dismantling bullying in schools. It's a huge divide here in terms of mis and disinformation. I want to take us back to the joy. We've had our moments to talk about this important context that we are working in. We have a video. Sorry, go ahead, Jessica.
One quick
Yeah.
thing on the previous topic. So
Yeah.
in the States, I served on the board for Drag Story Hour for a number of years I had to step away for not having enough time for my life reasons, but
Mhm.
to go back soon. And everything that you said is spot on, and the same in the States. But regarding the counter protests, there's a program which I don't know if it exists in British Columbia, but at least in the States, it's called Shields Up, and it is the sort of formal way that friends and allies of the organization can sort of help rally and protect these events so that
Mhm.
the kids and performers don't have to get utterly freaked out by people standing outside of the library chanting, and they just sort of form a wall of positivity and protection. So if you want
Yeah.
to get involved.
Thank thank you for that, Jessica, because I did want to clarify that it wasn't like, oh, everything's great in BC. It's more that when you feel so discouraged by hearing these stories and hearing these examples of hate, there is something you can do about it.
Yeah.
Like you can go and support the community. You can check out these books. You can go to the events. You can just make your voice heard in support.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, and thank you so much for those additions, was that we produce a video series called I Love My Human Rights, and it features folks who talking about their experiences of having their rights violated, of having discrimination or hate because of who they are, facing that, but also their journey as advocates and activists and how they've taken on these issues. They're just little short videos. And we did one, Brandon Yan, who is the executive director of Out on Screen, and he talked about this concept of queer joy, which is something that has always really struck with me. He was talking about exactly kind of this dynamic here, but how he reconciled it for himself of, the discrimination and oppression he got from outside, and then how to find that beauty within that would allow him to make this transition or in acceptance of his life in a joyful way. And I think, I see how we are typically inundated with these messages that your life will be very hard if you are trans or gender diverse. But that's such an societally imposed structure. And Jessica, one of the things I love so much about Julián as a Mermaid is how joyful it is. And I heard you, I think you used the word ecstatic in one interview I saw of you talking about, I think it was the swirl of the fish and Julián swimming with them as a mermaid. Can you talk more to us about what inspired that element of joy? I mean, we just heard some of that for sure, but
Yeah.
you can tell us a bit more.
Yeah, when I was making this book, I wanted to be, so I said, like, I didn't want to do a didactic story, and part of what I meant by that is due to the climate and the level of pushback and difficulty that is often surrounding these topics. I think the way that these stories get told can often fall into, like, meet character X. Character X is different for the following reasons. They go to school, they get terribly bullied or encounter some sort of devastating shutdown from somebody, and then they have to, like, reach deep down and rally, and there's, like, this moment of redemption. But the story is sort of defined by whatever this dark or nasty encounter is. And I really didn't want that to have a place in this story. I also didn't want to introduce, because this book is, like, could be read by a kid as young as 2 or 3 years old, or not read, but, like, it's mostly wordless. So I wanted it to be the kind of story that a kid could, like, flip through the pages and more or less follow along, even if they didn't have an adult there telling them what was happening. I wanted to be really careful not to be the one to introduce the idea that there's something wrong with any of these forms of expression. And I think that sometimes these well-meaning stories can sort of accidentally smuggle in that message to kids who it hadn't even occurred to them at that point that there might be a problem. And it's interesting, when I first started doing readings of these books, little kids it never occurred to them that Julián would be in trouble for dressing up. They thought he might be in trouble for messing up his abuela's apartment and using her stuff without asking, but the dress up in and of itself, that idea isn't problematic until someone tells you it is. And I wanted to protect the space of this book as a place of just joy and celebration, and like a little party that you could return to whenever you needed party.
I think my 10-year-old still has that. I don't think it's ever occurred to him that there's another reason he would get in trouble. I think it's entirely about, ooh, he used the curtains.
Yeah.
Good.
That's the sliding door of that book, is that childhood of like anxiety of like, oh no, I'm in trouble, I've done something bad. And it's our adult eyes that are putting in our own biases and our own understandings of gender and gender expression and stuff. It's great.
I want to switch gears a little bit because I've got some questions from the audience. One of them is for you, Jessica. This person says, I love these books and they are very popular in our, in brackets, white family. So I'm very excited for this talk. I would love to hear Jessica talk about her social position and her thinking about racism, how her thinking about racism has informed her decision to write picture books that center racialized folks.
Yeah. So I don't know, when I first got the idea of this story, Julián was always Black. He always was from a mixed language, a Spanish and English speaking family. I don't know, these characters kind of were always who they were. It wasn't like I wasn't attempting to like tick all of these diversity boxes. It was just, this is the way they arrived, kind of fully formed. And so then it kind of became my job to serve them as faithfully as I could and make the story as I think another way of answering it was like, it was always very clear to me because it was always very clear to me who this story was for. As I said, sort of the spirits of these children from Paris is Burning. I knew who I was making the book for. And I think when you know who you're speaking to, that sort of helps dictate the way in which you want to tell the story.
Yeah.
But yeah, these characters were always who they were. There was never really a moment where I was like, should I make them white? But I did put a lot of thought into how to tell that story as a white, cisgender woman. I thought about it a lot, and I talked to my Black friends, my queer friends, a lot about like, is this working? Am I getting this right? How does this make you feel? Do I need to rethink any of this? So there was a lot of that, but
yeah.
Yeah, did that?
No, I think that does answer the question. I mean, I'm reading it off, but to me, it answers the question that was asked. That piece around knowing your audience and speaking to your audience, I think is powerful, and knowing where this book comes from for you, what your inspiration was, is an important piece of the picture. We've got a question here that's directed at me, but I think it might be something that we could all answer. So how do you respond to the employment of the expression parents' rights in the anti-SOGI discourse? How do you reconcile parents' rights and distinguish what those are versus aren't with children's rights from age-appropriate agency, etc.? So maybe I'll start us off, but as I say, I'd be curious how you think about parents' rights in the context of libraries and reading, and in terms of how you produce picture books and who you're writing for, because you're obviously writing as well for the parents, as you spoke about as well. I think from my context of being the Human Rights Commissioner, the key here is that there is no human rights framework around parents' rights. There are rights that parents hold, for sure, but not in relation to their children. Their child's rights to have their best interests realized, to have the right to education, and so on, is what should direct decisions around children and families. There are ways, for example, that parents' rights do have an important element. For example, if a mother is experiencing violence, she has the right to be free from violence in her house, and it's also in her children's best interest to leave, but it's in her best interest to receive some protection for that. So it's not as simple as saying there are no such things as parent rights. Parents have their rights of themselves, but not in relation to their children. That's not within the human rights framework. So that's my first kind of answer to the question. When we talk about conflicting rights, it's always important to identify what are interests or wants versus what are human rights. So that's a key piece of it. And I think, as we've talked about, so much of what I think drives the parents' rights movement in the current moment, at least not necessarily the origins of it, but in how it's spreading, is about mis and disinformation. That we all have an interest in making sure that our children are in schools and feeling safe. That's something that all parents will share. It's the evidence about what allows children to feel safe. I think I probably speak for the panel when I say, from our perspective, giving children resources to help them feel like they can explore their identity in safe and happy and joyful ways is in children's best interest. That's what keeps them safe and comfortable at schools, not telling them they can't be who they are. And so I think it's getting at those root. What do we all have in common here? What do we actually want? And then how do we get there? Because denying identity, encouraging bullying at schools, or not discouraging bullying at schools, denying people's human rights is not in the child's best interests in library schools, wherever they're reading these books. Jessica, did you have anything you wanted to add to on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you said a lot of it just now, but I think I'm a parent, and the idea that I can tell my kid what to think and then he'll think that, I know that is a deluded perspective. I often wish I could, but I mean, I don't have much to say in terms of like a legislative framework around that, but just I think more a point of view that, like, the harder you push a kid in the direction you want them to go, the more likely they are to walk in the opposite direction.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think there's a difference between trying to instill an ethical and moral framework in a child and trying to shape who they are into a mold that you're comfortable with. I think those are two very different things.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And kids are not siloed in their homes. They have to live in the world. And I think, as you said, Kasari, so much of this, I think, backlash is predicated upon these misunderstandings of what these movements are about to begin with. Nobody's trying to make anybody's kid queer. Nobody is trying to turn anybody into anything that they're not. All of these
Yeah.
stories are just about making a little bit of room for people to be the way they already are. And I think, I don't know, in my experience, when you speak to that part of the parent, um, to the part to, that wants there to be space in the room for their kid to be who they are, there's often an opportunity for a little bit more grace. But the minute people think that someone is trying to mess with their kid, people's hackles go up. But that's not what any of us are trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody wants to change these kids. We just are trying to make a little bit of room for people to be the way they already are.
Yeah, I
That's
fully
all I really
agree.
say about that.
Georgia,
Yeah.
what's your response to that?
You guys have said everything so nicely. It's really special to have the perspective of someone who's making this material available. My response, I don't want to like simplify the situation or ignore the complexities that exist within um, parenting. And as a parent myself, I often try to tap into the deepest space of grace to think about like, oh, some of this backlash is coming from deep fear, just a
Yeah.
fear and a strong desire to protect your child. So that I put myself into that mindset when I try to think about why someone might be trying to have this control. But from a library perspective, children have a right to read and to browse their reading material and look at what's in the library. Parents have a responsibility to explain some of that. And they do have a right to talk about what their child reads at home. They don't have a right to talk about or to control what other children have access to. Like when we talk about things like removing books from collections, you can, as a parent, you have control and responsibility to talk about why maybe that isn't something you want your children looking at. I'm not here to tell you anything about that, but what you fundamentally don't have a right for is to take material away from all children. So libraries are really strong advocates for intellectual freedom, which is a very fancy way of saying people have the right to go and find information on subjects that are readily available, and as well as a child's right to read, because when you are exploring those spaces, we don't know what a child is going to get from a book specifically, and the freedom and autonomy that they can find in a public library space is invaluable in the journey of self-discovery, regardless of what kind of person you turn out to be. And it's more about, I always think of the metaphor of a garden for growing and flourishing. And I agree with you, Jessica, that when you really try to hammer something in, it sometimes it just doesn't work. Like it just doesn't. And a couple of times you've said you don't want to make a didactic book. I think this whole talk for me has been circulating on the idea of uh, like story, childhood, relatability, empathy, and then just the ability to discover these stories is really important. But yeah, so I would make a distinction between the right of the child versus the responsibility of the parent.
Well, thank you for all of this. We're out of time. There are more questions that we didn't have a chance to get to today. So many of which are focused on how do we respond? How do we respond to pressures within our society with changes in laws or proposed laws? How do we respond to pressures within our own families? And I'd loved your words, Jessica, although we don't have time to get to this question as a whole. I want to leave people with that piece you were just speaking about around this isn't about trying to get people to be anything they're not already. That's a really key message, I think, to counter some of the mis and disinformation, to counter some of the ideological tension here. This is about allowing people to be who they already are, or children to be who they already are. It has been such a pleasure to have both of you here for this conversation. Thank you so much for your wisdom, for your insights, Jessica, for your incredibly beautiful story. If folks want to rewatch this or share it with friends, there will be a recording on YouTube and on our website, as I mentioned earlier. I hope you'll join us for our next Beyond the Headlines event. That will be in October. And please join our book club if you're interested in these books. Jessica, I share very much your sentiment around wanting to talk about these issues through story. And Georgia, you've emphasized this as well, not through a didactic kind of learning experience, but we've tried to pick all of our children's books with that lens. Really, it's been my child has been my little test case of the books that we loved, because he connects to a story like so many of us do. In a moment, when you hang up here, you'll be redirected to a survey. We'd be really grateful for your feedback to help us improve the series as we go. Thank you again to our wonderful two guests for making the time for the conversation. And we wish all of you a very good day and week ahead. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you